Yusuf Hassan is my name. I'm currently the Member of Parliament for Kamkunji in Nairobi County. I have been elected for 3 times, and I'm about to appear for my 4th in the next election, if all goes well. I was born and bred in Nairobi. I come from Eastleigh, and I did live in different parts of Kenya. In Garissa, I went for my early madrasa education in Garissa, and my secondary school in Western Kenya, in Kuria, where I did my secondary school. After that, I came back to Nairobi, where I started work at the Voice of Kenya. Incidentally, a lot of people are always surprised when I say my first job was a DJ, playing music for youth on a youth program on Saturdays and Sundays. And while I was there, I was discovered by the BBC, and I went to London to start a training program as a broadcaster at the world famous BBC World Service. I spent some considerable time as a broadcaster at the BBC and other institutions. I also had the opportunity to go to university in London, where I did my BA and my Masters in public policy and politics and public administration. And then I left the BBC to set up an African newspaper magazine called Africa Events, which had its base in London. Also, during my period in exile, I was involved in multi-party politics. I'm a founder member of the Committee for the Release of Political Prisoners in Kenya, and also Mwakenya. I was the chairman in Europe and North America until I returned back to multipartyism in 2002 and the election of Mwai Kibaki. I lived mostly outside the country. For many years I worked for the United Nations. I started in the Geneva headquarters of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And then for a period I served in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East, North America. And finally, in my last years in the UN, I was based in New York, where I was a senior policy advisor to the then Secretary General Kofi Annan. Then I came back to Nairobi, where I became the director of the IRIN, the Integrated Regional Information Network, which was a news and humanitarian news network for the United Nations, which had its headquarters in Nairobi at that time. And then I went back for a short period, I went back to work as a spokesperson for UNHCR under the current Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres. And I had the opportunity of traveling with him, covering mostly Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. And in 2011, I left the UN to run for the Kamkunji constituency seat under the PNU party. And I was elected in a by-election in August 2011. Well, you know, when I was growing up, I came from a community that was persecuted, a community that was seen outside the political system of Kenya. And I grew up thinking that I was a second-class citizen. So I was conscientized politically at a very young age as a Kenyan from the Somali community. And although I did not come from northern Kenya, I was born in Nairobi and I grew up in western Kenya, I and my family became part of the general problem of looking at the conflict in northern Kenya, the Somali question, from an ethnic perspective. So I felt discriminated in terms of getting ID, in terms of getting passport, and I was radicalized by the general repressive policy of the government in northern Kenya. And so I was an activist from a very young age. I joined the political campaigns against the government. I became a member of an underground member of Mwakenya. By the time I left for Britain, I was already a person who felt that we needed change in our country. We needed democratic change. We needed a human rights regime that respected the basic rights of the Kenyan citizen. And when I went to London, I joined a bigger, broader Kenyan movement, Kenyan diaspora, that had left the country because the environment here did not allow the development of new ideas, the selection of people, of the kind of leadership that they want. It was a one-state system, and there was no space for there was no democratic space for people like me and others. And what had happened then was that we organized ourselves in solidarity with the Kenyan people. For example, in 1982, when Raila Odinga, Koigi wa Mwere, Maina wa Kenyati, many of the leading Kenyan intellectual and political activists were detained, we set up the Committee for the Release of Political Prisoners with the late Wanjiru Kihoro, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, so that we could provide support and solidarity to the Kenyan masses at that particular moment. And we were able to highlight and create a very effective campaign. And interestingly, during that period, we raised legal funds and support for the families. And one of the families that we supported was the Raila Odinga family. When Aida was fired from her job and kicked out of the accommodation at her school, we were able to support her. And the lawyer, Raila and Aida Odinga's lawyer, who was carrying out with their case here and whom we were in touch with, was none other than Martha Karua. Yeah. So it was quite a surprise for me to come back after the multi-party democracy to find that these people whom I knew to be on the same side, Raila Odinga, Martha Karua, Kiraito Murungi, I all found them here in Parliament, but they were on the opposite side of the political divide. And even though I was able to reach them and contact them when I wanted, I was quite shaken by the fact that, in fact, the democratic fighters of the second liberation were now political enemies on the Kenyan political stage. Well, I've always been a political-minded person. I wouldn't say that I'm a politician. I would say that I'm a reluctant politician. I didn't get into politics because I wanted for self-enrichment or for fame or because I wanted to hold a position. I was driven into politics because of my ideas and the kind of society that I dreamt of, the kind of society I thought we deserved as a country. And this was mainly driven by my convictions on the need for a democracy, respect for human rights, good governance, equity and social justice. So in fact, when I came back in 2006, I only came back in 2006, after 2 decades of being in exile. Although there was democratic change, and although the space has opened, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, you had the right of association. But when I came back and I looked at the conditions of my own neighborhood of Eastleigh, I found it in a deplorable state. It was in an appalling state. The infrastructure was completely broken. The social services were not non-existent. And I found that our city, our capital city, was a dysfunctional one. So although I was seated in the comfort of the UN campus in Gigiri, I felt that there was absolutely no benefit for me to be sitting in that comfortable position, in a well-paid position, getting good salary, living a good life, when my own neighborhood was in such a terrible state. So I was reluctantly drawn into seeking solutions for the problems of governance, the violations of human rights, the discrimination, because even kids who were born in Eastleigh could not get IDs normally. I got sucked into it and I ran for a parliamentary seat in order to make a difference. But I've never thought myself as a politician. I think the most important one is to be able to make sure that the voice of Eastleigh, the voice of Kamkunji is heard at the national level, in the General Assembly, in leadership forums, that we, for the first time, the people of Kamkunji have a representative who is dedicated and standing up for their rights and their interests. I don't have any other employment. I don't have any other interest. I'm constantly here as a full-time staff member of the people of Kamkunji, and I have done that to a certain extent for raising their voices. And I think to a certain extent we have had a response, a positive response from the government. Much of the infrastructure that was destroyed or damaged has been repaired. We now have some very good roads. We have done our schools. We have raised the intake of students from marginalized neighborhoods like the slums of Kamkunji. We have built the first secondary school for our girls. The second secondary school is now up and running. We've also built a secondary school in a deprived area that was underserved. And now many of these kids from these informal sectors are able to send kids to schools in the neighborhood rather than in distant places. We have also helped thousands and thousands of students who were unable to previously pay for their fees because their parents came from poor backgrounds. And I'm very proud of the fact that whenever I walk in the streets, I meet a mother, a single mother, who says, my son or my daughter has finished her secondary school, has finished her university because of the reliable and unconditional bursary support that they have been able to get. I've also worked on the issues that disturbed me as a youngster. For example, now there's an ID registration center in Kamkunji, and people don't have to go to distances or to their regions of origins to get an ID. We have simplified the process to get passports. To a certain extent, it's much easier for someone from Eastleigh to get a passport than it was some years ago. But more importantly, I think for role modeling, that there are a lot of youngsters like me when I was many years ago, who felt that they were not part of the Kenyan story, who felt that they were not full Kenyan citizens, can see a role model. They can see Yusuf, who is one of them, who is from their own neighborhood, is now a member of parliament in the National Assembly of the Republic of Kenya. And I think that's a big, in the capital city of Kenya. So we are no longer kind of a marginalized community that is in the background, I think. And in the case, the rise of Eastleigh, for example, for me, has also taught me lessons that once you give people confidence and you create an enabling environment, the Kenyan people are very hardworking and they feel that space and they work hard to rise very quickly. Eastleigh, some 10 years ago, did not have the infrastructure it has, did not have the kind of high-raised buildings that it has. Now it looks like a city within a city. Gikomba is also another raising place. We have just finished the first modern market, which is about 6 stories and carries hundreds and hundreds of stalls. The second phase of that Gikomba market that had been completely neglected for many years is now rising up. And within some few months, we will be having the second phase open up for over 1,000 stalls. And that kind of little by little progress is some of the achievements that I can see and I am very proud of. But there are many other things that I have noticed and I have seen and experienced as an administrator. That working in Parliament and working with the Kenyan bureaucracy is a very difficult thing, even when the decisions are made, when the budgets are delivered. Still, it takes a long time to turn the wheel around and to implement that particular project. For example, there are quite a number of roads whose budget was approved last year, whose tenders were given out last year, that are still incomplete because of the slow process of the bureaucracy, which I find, having lived outside for so many years, quite frustrating. I think that I'm very active in the committee level. I have belonged to the Department of Committee of Foreign Affairs and Defense since I was elected. I have served on it 3 times, and this particular department depends a lot of my expertise on international relations, international affairs and diplomacy. And I'm a very active and critical member of Parliament in that committee. I've also served in other committees like the Constitutional Implementation and Oversight Committee. I've served on the Delegated Legislation Committee. I've served on the Budget Committee. And in all those committees, I'm a hands-on, very active member of Parliament. And in the first Parliament, the 10th and 11th Parliament, I was one of the most active speakers on the floor of the Parliament. But in the last Parliament, I see that the numbers have increased, the pressure on the Speaker has increased, and it is very, very difficult to engage as much as in the older days. And I think the bigger the Parliament becomes, the more difficult it is. But I must say that I'm one of the most active members of Parliament. If you look at the Hansard, if you look at my contribution, I've brought a number of petitions. I have brought the petition to make sure that Kamukunji, the historic grounds, the Kamukunji historic grounds are protected. I have brought a petition now seeking that the Karura forest should be named after the great environmentalist Wangari Maathai. I've been involved in the amendment and of quite a number of bills that have come and successfully been passed in Parliament. But I found that the majority of my voters consider the issue of representation and oversight as a secondary factor. And a lot of the demands from places like the inner areas of Nairobi, like Kamukunji, is that the MP is much more than a representative in Parliament. The MP is a welfare officer, the MP is a health officer, the MP is a funeral officer, and if you do not meet many of those expectations, then your ratings and your popularity in the neighborhood declines, although it is not in your job description. And these are some of the things that I feel we need to change so that the public gets the necessary services that they need in education, in health, in social welfare, so that they do not take too much of the members of Parliament's time and energy to focus on the bigger and more important issues of representation and oversight. Absolutely not. I never thought, because I've lived abroad for so long, I did not expect that it would be my job or anyone's job to be told about the personal affairs of every voter. And to a certain extent, it is an impossible task. And I cannot see how a member of Parliament can financially meet the needs of every voter. I think this is unacceptable and unnecessary. Although on humanitarian grounds, I meet a lot of those demands that I can. For example, on education, I absolutely have no problem. I'm happy to support and fund any kid who is in need and ready to go on with their studies. In fact, one of my slogans is that no child should be left behind. And I really believe it. If I don't get it from the bursary, I get it from the foundation and the other connections that I have to make sure. And if necessary, I would be more than happy to sort of fall back into my own resources to make sure that child goes to school. Well, actually, there's a big difference between the Kenya that I knew when I left in the 1980s. Nairobi was a much smaller city. The communities were more intertwined, and together we had a community association in Eastleigh. I was the secretary of one of those committees when I was growing up. It was a community that looked after each other. It was a neighborhood that you knew almost everybody by name. And there was a very strong supportive system. And secondly, even the government institutions were functional. For example, I remember in the old days when one of the street bulbs, street lights blew up it will be reported immediately, and the Public Works Department will be fixing it within a day. Even if there was a crack or a problem on the road, or there was a damage that had happened, it will be marked immediately, and the Public Works would respond to it. The Nairobi City Council was much more efficient in its work. You knew your councillor, you knew the officials who were involved in what, sewage clearance, water problems. It was much more a neater system than at that time. But when I came back to a city that had grown beyond belief. For example, Kamkunji did not have many of the informal sector areas that exist. There was no Kiambiu, there was no many of this Motherland, Mugunda, Kinyago. Some of these places were green areas with vegetation. When I came back, there were thousands of informal sector people. And Eastleigh, the neighborhood that I grew, which was a neat residential neighborhood, which was multicultural. There was a very big Indian community, Seshulwa, Arabs. It was quite a mixed city. Had completely changed to become a predominantly Somali town. So the demography had changed, and then Nairobi City Council had completely collapsed and has become a dysfunctional organization. The city was chaotic. It had completely fallen apart. So that was quite a big shock. And secondly, the demography that I came back to was completely a new crop of immigrants, mostly from rural areas that I did not know before. In fact, the day I resigned from the United Nations, they asked me, "Are you sure? You've been away for so long. Who knows you?" The Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, did not accept my resignation. He said, "I was a politician. I'm the former Prime Minister of Portugal. I ran for political office. But I think something is wrong with you. After all these years, who knows you where you're going back to? Have you thought about this thing? Think again. I'm not going to accept your resignation." But I persisted. But after some few days of doing my own research, I came to know that, in fact, although Eastleigh was my hometown, it is not the Eastleigh that I knew. It is not the Nairobi that I knew. It had changed completely. So that was the first cultural shock. The second one was when I became a member of parliament. I was prepared. I've done international law, international relations. I've done politics. I felt it was an area that I was familiar with, and I felt I was well equipped when I came to parliament to be able to push that legislative and representational agenda in parliament that my people needed very much. But when I came in, they told me, "Look, you can go there 1 or 2 or 3 days to do your things, but we need your help here. We need you to give us work. You need to look after our sick people. You need to take people out of hospitals. You need to help us in our funerals. You need to pay the school fees of our people." So my job description suddenly changed drastically. And it was quite shocking because people didn't expect when you told them, "Look, I'm just a mere member of parliament. I'm going to represent you in parliament. I wouldn't be able to do a lot of these things that you're asking of me. But I will campaign for us to have a government that can provide you with the health, with the education, with the public services that you need. I'm going to do that for you." And I remember one day I achieved a major milestone. Eastleigh, First Avenue, Eastleigh, which was a muddy, run-down road that had fallen apart, was rebuilt. And we had a brand new dual carriage road, the first one in Kamkunji. And I was out in the streets telling people how important that achievement was. And I met a group of young voters. And they said, "Mheshimiwa, kwani barabara, what have you done for us?" I said, "Have you seen not the roads? I'm doing the schools." "Barabara, kwani sisi tunakula barabara, hatuna gari. What would we do with a barabara?" And then I said, "The schools are also improving, you can go back." No, we are dropouts from school. We can't go back to school. That's not for. What have you done for us? Tumbo, kazi ya tumbo. That I almost melted down because I felt, God, if that is the expectation that people have of me, then I'm really going to fail in my job as a legislator. Really, that day was really a very beautiful, bright day. And I can tell you as a Nairobian, December, if you have lived in countries with winter, December is a very dark and gloom month, very depressing month. But in Kenya, in Nairobi, in December is the brightest, the most beautiful month of the year. And it was one of those days when I was campaigning, when this terrible thing happened. I came out of a beautiful bright day and I plunged into darkness immediately without explanation. So it was a very sad, tragic day for me, and even more for the families who lost about 8 people who died in that bomb blast. And it has been a terrible experience. There was a period when, during that time, when I really lost faith in humanity. And I felt that, in fact, humanity had evil people, bad people, who did the kind of things that they did to me. And I was in extreme pain and suffering for quite a while, in and out of hospitals. So it took me quite a bit of time to be able to get up psychologically and say, look, what has happened, you have suffered. And I was greatly encouraged by outpouring of sympathy of people who really returned the faith that I had in humanity. And in particularly after my re-election some few weeks later, that the people of Kamkunji re-elected me in my absence. I got up one day and I said, look, what had happened. You should not be a prisoner of the past. And that experience humbled me. It showed how weak we are as human beings. And the fact that I have recovered and I was given a chance meant that I should not be lamenting or suffering too much about what had happened. I got up and decided that I should get on with my life. And to a certain extent, that experience has strengthened me. It has given me hope in humanity. It has given me the courage and the energy to go on to make a difference in the lives of people within my own family, within my community, within my constituency, and to a certain extent in my country, Africa and the world. Well, there are a lot of hard decisions that one makes all the time. I think the hardest decision that I made as a politician for me was to decide to stand again in Kamkunji when I had mutilated, smashed legs in terrible pain, when everybody was telling me, heal yourself, heal yourself. Politics was not on my mind. And I think it was a very hard decision because it was on the brink. I had almost decided that I would never be involved in politics ever again. I'm going to heal myself and get on with my life. And politics should be for those who can get onto it. And I came under a lot of pressure from people who are visiting me to say, look, if you give up, you're giving up to terrorism. You're giving up to violent criminal activity. You're giving up to evil acts. And therefore, that I think was to me a very difficult decision. The other difficult decision for me that I went through before that was that, in fact, I was originally a member of ODM. And I joined ODM because the comrades that I was involved with in the fight for multi-party democracy in our second liberation were people like Raila Odinga, people like Anyang' Nyong'o, people like James Orengo. So when I joined, I came back into politics. My natural instinct, ideologically, was to work with like-minded people, people with a history of struggle, people who have sacrificed for the democratic changes that we were seeking. But I contested the ODM party primaries and I won in Kamkunji in 2007. And when I won and I was announced by the returning officer on radio and television, when I went to collect my ticket, my party certificate, that was changed. It was given to someone whom I had defeated in the primaries. And at that particular moment, I was put on a crossroad, a very difficult choice of to say, do you stick on with the party and the leadership that you believed in ideologically? Or are you going to seek re-election to give the people of Kamkunji the choice to choose the representative they want? And at that particular moment, a lot of my former friends, ideological friends, were saying leaving the party was a betrayal. But to me, I put the people of Kamkunji above the party position at that time. And I felt that that decision was not democratic. And that was very difficult because we parted ways with many people whom we had traveled the long road of political change and political campaign and political reform.
Do you have any regrets with regard to your political life?
Absolutely none. I think to a certain extent there are people who are sitting on the fence. A lot of people who are in the struggle with us from my background, progressive, liberal or left wing, who say that being a member of parliament is a betrayal of the aspirations of the Kenyan people. But I don't believe sitting on the fence. I felt that I could do more for the people that I was fighting for by being in parliament. And I think I'm absolutely sure that was the right decision to make. And I'm happy I made that decision because I can see how much difference we have made and how far we have come. I think it is important for people to participate in the political process. Absolutely, I would say that I encourage every young Kenyan to get engaged in the political process, because if you don't engage, if you don't vote or run for office, then you're given opportunities to weak, poor politicians. You're also giving up on making decisions on matters that affect your daily lives. And they say that in advanced democracies that by not participating in the political process, you're allowing fools to rule you. And I think there is a certain truth to that. And some people say if you're not at the table where the decisions are made, you will be on the menu. So I'm encouraging a lot of young people to get engaged, be it at the school level, at the university level, at the community level, the county level, or at the national level. But I think it is important to have political convictions. You must have principles and values, and you must have goals that are based on those principles and values. And that includes honesty, integrity, and also to have the interest of the community that you're trying to work for. If you don't have that interest as an individual, because we all have self-interest. You know, I, for example, can't say there wasn't a self-interest in my desire to be a member of parliament. But that self-interest must be based on the bigger good, the common good. And I think if you line up your convictions, your principles and your values with the political commitment of changing society, then you're on the right track. And politics becomes a calling and a mission rather than something that you get in because of a career, to make money or to advance yourself or to become famous or to gain from your political position. If your ultimate purpose is to change society for the better, to make a difference, then for heaven's sake, don't wait, come into politics and do whatever you can do. But if your interest is to advance yourself as a person, do that outside. Advance yourself, build your career, become a successful profession, and then maybe in your advanced stage, come back and serve your community when you have the means to do it. But by all means, I would say that politics is very interesting. Politics is very rewarding. It's very uplifting if your heart is in the right place, which is to serve the community, the people and the country, and make a difference and move that community and that country upwards. I think as national institutions, national assemblies and parliaments in the world, in some of the other countries do promote parliamentarism and multi-party democracy at the school level. They visit schools, parliamentarians go and speak at schools, secondary schools, universities, workers' associations. They go out to conscientize the population about the importance of the legislative process, why this institution is important, what parliamentarians do, what their job description is. And then Parliament is also open to the public, not just for schools to come and visit and see what's happening in the chamber, but also opportunities for internship, lectures and discussions. For example, it would be very good if the National Assembly had a center, a hall, where we could take turns speaking to invited youngsters from different institutions. For maybe a weekly, you could have lectures or discussions and interactions with young people, so that you can inculcate the importance of the national legislative process towards that younger generation. But unfortunately, I find one of the problems here now in Kenya is the image, the reputation of the Member of Parliament is not that positive. And the word politician is negative. And it is very difficult to change that unless we can show how important Parliament is, how important the role of MPs is, and what positive things the members of Parliament are doing. And I think our National Assembly can do that role of outreach, education, engagement, so that the young Kenyan can grow up feeling proud of their National Assembly as one of their decision-making institutions. Well, I'm here again. I'm going to defend my seat, and I want to bring more issues that I have not been able to tackle in the last, in this particular 12th Parliament. Hopefully, I believe that there's a lot of work to be done in terms of legislation. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in Kamkunji. I've learned quite a lot during the period I've been a Member of Parliament, and I believe that I still have a role to play in finding solutions to some of those issues and pushing for some of the burning issues in my constituency. And after that, maybe I would see what else I can do, because I feel full of energy. I feel I have a lot of ideas, and I feel that I have a lot to contribute to the Kenyan society and to this country that I love very much. I can tell you that this is a very beautiful city. I have worked in more than 25 countries. I've worked in New York, in Washington, D.C., in London, in Geneva, Johannesburg, Pretoria, Harare, Bangkok, Jakarta, Islamabad, Dubai, and I've been to all these places, and I've traveled to a lot of other countries. This is a beautiful city by any standard. Look at this beautiful sunshine, green sunshine 367 days. We have a national park. We have a great pool of highly skilled, educated people. This can be one of the greatest cities in the world. It's got a very hard-working population. What we are lacking is a leadership. Nairobi has had a terrible leadership problem, and I hope one of these days, in this election, we get a thinking, working, good manager who can run the city and bring back some of its glory and maybe even lift it up. And I'm here as a parliamentarian from the capital city to also offer my thoughts and thinking and my contribution to how to make this city great again. But unless we can get the right leadership, we're not going to be able to lift our city and emerge one of the most respected and loved cities in the world. Yes, I'm married. I'm married to a journalist like myself. She now works for the United Nations. I have 5 children, 3 girls and 2 boys. My eldest son is, they were all born outside the country when I was in exile, but they have all come back. One of them is a director with an international company. The other one runs a bookshop in Lavington. One is in university in Britain doing his last year. And the younger ones are doing their secondary and primary studies at the moment. I come from a large family. My parents had 11 children. My father had 33 brothers and sisters. They're all my cousins and second cousins are spread all over the world. I spend mostly in my part-time reading. I like music. I like visiting different parts of the country, seeing the beauty of our great country. I travel a lot as well on leisure, not necessarily on business, to different spots of the world. So I take my parliamentary business very seriously, but I also take my family business very seriously. I think, and I noted even more how important the family is. When I was in hospital, paralyzed, the considerable support and love that I got from my family was one of the strengths that allowed me to get back again on my feet.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.